My name is Clara Monroe, though for the better part of 2 decades, my identity was more deeply woven into the fabric of a company than it was into my own life. I grew up in the misty outskirts of Port Blossom, a city that always smells of damp earth and blooming rhododendrons, where the sky is a perpetual watercolor of soft grays and blues. My father was a cartographer, a man who believed every place had a story, and my mother was a gardener, a woman who believed every soul, like every seed, held the potential for beauty if given the right conditions to grow. I suppose I inherited a piece of them both, a love for the intricate maps of human connection and a deep-seated belief in nurturing potential. For 18 years, that belief found its home at Fairchild and Monroe Urban Design, a firm that started with the noble intention of creating cities for people, not just for profit. I joined as a junior analyst, fresh from university with a degree in sociology and a heart full of earnest ideals. I believed in our mission. I believed in the quiet integrity of Mr. Fairchild, the founding partner who knew every employee by name and asked about their children. I rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the Director of Community Projects, a title that felt less like a job and more like a calling. My work was my garden. I tended to projects, nurtured relationships, and helped communities blossom. But gardens change. The soil shifts, invasive species take root. Mr. Fairchild retired, his gentle guidance replaced by the sleek, modern efficiency of Declan Thorne. Where Mr. Fairchild saw communities, Declan saw profit centers. Where I saw people, he saw human resources. The soul of the company began to feel like a distant memory, a faded photograph in a dusty album. Still, I stayed. I stayed for the work, for the teams I'd built, and for my mother, whose garden had become a small patch of pots on a hospital balcony, her battle with a quiet, persistent illness a constant, humming anxiety beneath the surface of my life. The salary, the benefits, they were the trellis my life clung to. I told myself I was still tending to good things, even as the ground beneath me turned barren. The end, when it came, was as quiet and sterile as the conference room where it happened. The room was on the 12th floor, a glass box overlooking the steel and granite heart of Port Blossom. It was always cold in there, the air conditioning a constant, artificial whisper. "Clara, we appreciate everything you've done for us," Declan began, his voice a smooth, practiced melody of corporate regret. He sat across the polished mahogany table, his posture perfect, his designer suit uncreased. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on a point just over my shoulder, as if addressing my ghost. Beside him, a woman from HR I'd only ever seen in company-wide emails tapped a pen against a notepad, her expression one of polite, professional disinterest. "But as you know," he continued, "the firm is undergoing a significant strategic realignment. We're streamlining our operations to enhance synergy and focus on core growth sectors." The jargon was a smokescreen, a wall of meaningless words designed to obscure the simple, brutal truth. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating near the ceiling, watching a scene unfold below. I saw myself, a woman of 46 with a few strands of silver in her dark hair, sitting perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I had worn my favorite blouse that day, a soft, forest green silk. It felt suddenly foreign against my skin. And as part of this restructuring, the HR woman, Brenda, chimed in, finally making eye contact, though her eyes were as flat and empty as a winter sky. "Your position has been eliminated. The change is effective immediately." Eliminated. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. Not laid off, not let go. Eliminated. As if my 18 years of service, the late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the passion I had poured into every project, were nothing more than a line item that could be erased with a single keystroke. I thought of the annual incentives, the substantial performance bonus I was due in less than 2 weeks. It was already allocated in my mind, a down payment on a better care facility for my mother, a fund to finally fix the leaky roof of my small cottage, a sliver of peace in the constant, churning worry over money. I had seen the preliminary reports. My department had just secured the Viridian Project, a landmark community revitalization grant that would set the firm up for years. My bonus was assured, and it was significant. "I see," I said. My voice was calm, a quiet pool in the midst of a silent earthquake. I was surprised by its steadiness. "Will there be a severance package?" Brenda slid a thin folder across the table. "The standard offering. For week's pay, and we will not contest your unemployment filing. We trust this transition will be smooth and professional." The unspoken threat was as clear as the glass wall behind her. "Don't make a scene. Don't cause trouble. Disappear quietly." Declan finally looked at me then, a flicker of something relief, pity in his eyes before it was shuttered away. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors, Clara." "Truly." I stood up slowly, my limbs feeling heavy, disconnected. I nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement. I didn't trust myself to speak again. I picked up my handbag and walked out of the glass box, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and quiet betrayal behind me. The walk back to my office was the loneliest journey of my life. The open-plan space, once a vibrant ecosystem of collaboration and chatter, was now a landscape of averted eyes and sudden, intense focus on computer screens. My team, the people I had mentored and championed, didn't know what to do. I saw their confusion, their fear. I gave a small, sad smile to Maya, my brilliant and kind-hearted junior lead, who looked up at me with wide, heartbroken eyes. At my desk, a cardboard box was waiting. My personal effects, a framed photo of my mother in her garden before she got sick, a collection of smooth stones from a beach near my childhood home, a chipped mug that said "Plant Kindness" looked like artifacts from another life. I packed them away methodically, moving with a dreamlike slowness. Each object was a memory, a testament to a life I had built within these walls. As I swept my notebooks and pens into the box, it felt less like cleaning out a desk and more like excavating a tomb. The elevator ride down was a descent into a new reality. As the city lights blurred past the glass, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I just felt erased. The 18 years I had dedicated to Fairchild and Monroe had vanished in an 8-minute meeting. I was no longer Clara Monroe, Director of Community Projects. I was just Clara. And, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure who that was. That evening, I didn't open a bottle of wine or collapse into tears. I went home to my little cottage on the edge of the city, the one my parents had left me, and I walked out into my garden. The autumn air was crisp, scented with pine and rain. The hydrangeas were fading from blue to a dusty purple, and the late-season roses were heavy on their stems. I sank to my knees on the damp earth, pulling a few stubborn weeds from around the base of a lavender bush. My fingers, stained with soil, felt more real than they had all day. Here, in the quiet company of growing things, I was not eliminated. I was just a woman, tending her garden, under a vast and indifferent sky. It was there, with my hands in the dirt, that a memory surfaced, faint and distant, like a scent on the wind. A memory of my first contract negotiation, so many years ago. I had just landed a huge account, my first big win, and Mr. Fairchild himself had taken me to lunch to celebrate. We had talked about loyalty, about what it meant to build a company that was also a community. He had offered me a raise, and emboldened by his kindness, I had asked for something more, a clause I'd read about, one that protected long-term employees. He had smiled, respecting the foresight, and agreed. I went back inside, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. The box from my office sat by the door, a cardboard coffin of my professional life. I knelt and began to rummage through it, past the books and photos, until my fingers brushed against a thick, forgotten manila envelope at the very bottom, tucked beneath a stack of old project binders. My original employment contract. I slid the heavy paper from the envelope. It was dated 16 years prior. My signature, young and hopeful, was scrawled at the bottom, next to the elegant, looping script of Mr. Fairchild. I unfolded the pages, the legalese a dense forest of words. I scanned the sections, my eyes searching. And then I found it. Section 8, subsection C, termination of employment. Buried deep within a paragraph about dismissal protocols was a single, carefully worded sentence. In the event that a senior-level employee with more than 10 years of continuous service is terminated without cause, the employee shall be entitled to a final compensation equivalent to 5% of the company's net profit for the fiscal quarter in which the termination occurs, in lieu of any standard bonus or severance. I read it once, then again. 5%. Not of my department's budget. Of the entire company's quarterly net profit. The clause was a relic from a different era, a promise made by a man of integrity, a safeguard he had willingly given to protect the people he considered family. Declan, with his focus on streamlining and synergy, would have never read this. He wouldn't have even known where to look. He operated on the assumption that the past was irrelevant, that institutional memory could be deleted as easily as an employee file. A slow, quiet laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a sound of triumph or revenge. It was the sound of bewildered wonder, the kind of laugh one has upon discovering a rare, beautiful wildflower pushing its way through a crack in the pavement. They thought they had erased me. But Mr. Fairchild, a ghost from the company's better past, had left me a map. And I was beginning to remember how to read it. The next morning, the mist hung low over the city, wrapping the tall buildings in a soft, gray shroud. I didn't look for a legal pit bull. I looked for a gardener, someone who understood that justice, like a garden, requires patience, careful tending, and a deep understanding of the roots. I found her in a quiet, ivy-covered building in a historic part of town. Miss Evelyn Reed was a woman in her late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, centered presence that immediately put me at ease. Her office smelled of old books and Earl Grey tea. A thriving fiddle-leaf fig stood in the corner, its leaves glossy and green. She listened to my story without interruption, her hands steepled on her large oak desk, her gaze steady and compassionate. When I finished, she took the contract I offered her and read the clause, her expression unreadable. She looked up at me, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. "This is a beautifully drafted piece of protection, Ms. Monroe," she said, her voice warm and measured. "A bit of an heirloom in this day and age. It is clear, unambiguous, and, I suspect, entirely forgotten by the current leadership." "That's what I believe," I said, a knot of anxiety loosening in my chest. However, she cautioned gently, they will not simply honor it. They will fight. They terminated you without cause in person, but on paper, they will invent a cause. They will claim poor performance, insubordination, anything to nullify this clause. The thought sent a chill through me. The idea of them rewriting my history, tarnishing 18 years of dedicated work with lies, felt like a deeper violation than the firing itself. "They will try to muddy the waters," Ms. Reed continued, "to make this about your character and competence. Our task is not to argue with them. It is to build a fortress of truth so solid that their fictions cannot penetrate it. We need to demonstrate two things, irrefutably. First, that you are not just a competent employee, but an exemplary one. And second, that their motive for eliminating your position was purely financial, specifically to avoid paying you what you were owed from the Viridian Project's success." Her words weren't a call to arms, they were a blueprint for restoration. She wasn't fueling my anger, she was validating my worth and giving me a path to reclaim it. "Start with your history," she advised. "Gather every piece of evidence of your value. Performance reviews, emails of commendation from leadership, including Declan, client testimonials, project completion reports. We will create a portrait of your career that they cannot deface." I nodded, my purpose crystallizing. This was no longer just about the money. It was about my story, my work, my integrity. It was about ensuring that the narrative of my time at Fairchild and Monroe was one I wrote, not one that was fabricated to serve their greed. I left Ms. Reed's office feeling not like a warrior marching into battle, but like an archivist tasked with preserving a vital truth. The rain had started, a soft, steady drizzle that washed the city clean. I pulled up the collar of my coat and walked into the gentle rain, my first step on the path back to myself. That evening, I reached out to Maya. I chose a small, quiet cafe near her apartment, a place with steamy windows and the comforting aroma of coffee and baked bread. She arrived looking anxious, her bright, youthful face clouded with worry. "Clara, I'm so sorry," she whispered as soon as she sat down, clutching her tea mug as if it were a lifeline. "It was horrible. One minute you were there, and the next, they just told us you decided to pursue other opportunities. Nobody believed it. It felt so cold." "It was," I said gently. "But I'm all right, Maya. I just need a little help understanding something." I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the fear of a current employee speaking to a former one, the invisible lines of company loyalty and self-preservation. "Anything I ask you is confidential," I assured her. "I would never put you at risk." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Of course. What do you need to know?" "The Viridian Project," I said. "I know we landed it, but there was no announcement. Declan has been silent. What's the official status?" Maya's expression soured. "That's the strangest part. Internally, he's taking all the credit. He presented the initial profit projections to the partners last week. The numbers are staggering. He told them it was his strategic oversight that sealed the deal." Bile rose in my throat, but I pushed it down. "He's claiming it as his victory?" "Completely. And he's been talking a lot about fiscal responsibility. How he's trimming the fat to maximize the quarter's profitability before the annual shareholder report. He called the layoffs a painful but necessary fiscal correction." Her voice dripped with quiet contempt. "He called you the head of our department and the heart of that project, the fat." The word stung more than eliminated had. It was dehumanizing, reducing my entire contribution to a cost on a spreadsheet. "Maya," I said, my voice low and steady. "I need evidence of that. Not just his words, but the numbers. Are there internal memos, emails, presentation slides about the Viridian profit projections? Anything that connects the timing of my firing to the bottom line?" She hesitated for only a moment. Her loyalty to me, to the work we had done together, was stronger than her fear of Declan. She had been my mentee, but in that moment, she became my ally. "I think I can get something," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "He keeps all his major presentation files on the shared executive drive. He's arrogant. He probably thinks no one would dare to look. I'll be careful." We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken bond between us solidifying. I was asking her to take a significant risk, and we both knew it. "Thank you, Maya," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." "He shouldn't be allowed to do this," she said, her eyes flashing with a spark of the fierce idealism I had first seen in her. "He can't just erase you." We paid for our drinks and left separately, melting back into the misty Port Blossom evening. As I drove home, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the information, but for the connection. In firing me, Declan had intended to isolate me, to render me powerless. But he had underestimated the resilience of the relationships I had spent years tending. He had cut the trunk of the tree, but he had forgotten about the roots. 3 days later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It was from a prestigious and notoriously aggressive law firm downtown, Dalton and Shaw, Fairchild and Monroe's corporate counsel. Ms. Reed had sent them a polite, formal letter, invoking the clause in my contract and requesting the relevant financial data to calculate my compensation. This was their response. I met Ms. Reed in her office to open it. The letter within was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. "They assert that your termination was for cause," Ms. Reed read, her voice even. They cite a documented pattern of behavior that was not in alignment with the company's strategic goals, failure to meet key performance indicators, and creating a divisive atmosphere within your team. My breath hitched. It was one thing to anticipate lies. It was another to see them printed in black and white on heavy, expensive paper. And to support these claims, she continued, turning a page, they have attached copies of 3 formal written warnings and a final negative performance review, all signed by Declan Thorne, all dated in the months leading up to your dismissal. She slid the documents across the desk. I picked them up with a hand that trembled slightly. The first warning alleged I had been insubordinate in a leadership meeting in July. I remembered that meeting clearly. It was the day I had presented the final, successful proposal for the Viridian project, and Declan had publicly praised my team's innovative approach. The second claimed I had missed a critical deadline in August, a deadline for a project that had, in fact, been delivered a week early. The final review was a work of fiction, painting me as a disgruntled and ineffective manager. None of the documents bore my signature. There was no space for my response, no indication that I had ever seen them. They were unilateral declarations designed to assassinate my professional character. I have never seen these before in my life, I said, my voice a strained whisper. The coldness of the fabrication was breathtaking. This wasn't just a lie, it was a forgery of my reality. Ms. Reed nodded slowly, her expression calm. I didn't expect you had. This is the fiction they have created. Now, we must find the flaw in their story. I stared at the perfectly formatted documents, the crisp letterhead, the confident signature of Declan Thorne at the bottom of each page. He was so thorough in his cruelty. And then, a small detail snagged my attention. A memory of Declan, flustered and impatient, trying to format a simple memo in Microsoft Word. He didn't write these, I said, a thought taking shape. Declan can barely use a word processor. He doesn't know the first thing about creating a template. He'd have his assistant do it, or he'd do it himself, hastily, on his own computer. Ms. Reed's eyes lit up with understanding. And if he created them on his computer, the original files still exist somewhere. On the shared drive, I breathed, where Maya said he keeps his presentations. The files will have metadata, Ms. Reed said, the quiet excitement in her voice palpable. A digital fingerprint. It will tell us the exact date and time the documents were created. My heart began to beat faster. If Declan had created these warnings after he fired me to retroactively justify his actions, the metadata would prove it. His meticulous lie would contain the seeds of its own undoing. I sent a carefully worded email to Maya, explaining what we needed, not the PDF copies, but the original source files. It was a bigger risk, asking her to access and copy files directly from her boss's private folders. I held my breath after I hit send, the weight of my request sitting heavily on me. Her reply came just after 1 in the morning, a simple message with an attachment. I found them in a folder labeled HR Admin. I think you'll find the creation dates illuminating. Be careful, Clara. I downloaded the files and immediately forwarded them to Ms. Reed. Then, I opened the first one on my own laptop. I navigated to the file properties, my hand shaking. Date created, October 26th, 9:14 a.m. I had been fired on October 25th. I opened the next file. Date created, October 26th, 9:22 a.m. The third, the fourth. All of them were created the morning after my position had been eliminated. They hadn't just lied. They had manufactured the evidence after the fact, building a fortress of deceit on a foundation of sand. A wave of something fierce and clean washed over me. It wasn't the hot burn of anger, but the cold, clear light of certainty. The truth was on my side. I sat back, looking out my window at the moonlit garden. The world was quiet. The company thought they were powerful, that their lawyers and their lies could crush a single person. But they had forgotten about the small, indelible truths, the digital fingerprints and the quiet loyalties they couldn't control. They had forgotten that even in the most manicured corporate landscape, wild things can still grow. Just as the first light of dawn was breaking, I did the math. Based on the preliminary Viridian numbers Maya had mentioned, the company's quarterly profit was projected to be north of $50 million. 5% of that was $2.5 million. The number was so large it felt unreal, an abstraction. It wasn't a prize I had won. It was a debt I was owed. It was 18 years of my life, quantified in the sterile language of finance. It was my mother's future, my own security, my peace of mind. And I was going to reclaim every single penny. The company's next move was an offer of peace, but it was the peace of a conqueror. They offered a settlement, $75,000, contingent on the signing of a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would have prevented me from ever speaking of my time at the firm again. It was a test, a calculated insult disguised as generosity, meant to see if I would take the quick money and disappear. "They're nervous," Ms. Reed said, her tone dry as she reviewed the offer. "This isn't a serious proposal. It's a probe. They're trying to gauge how much we know." "We reject it, of course," I said. The amount felt like a pittance, a tip left on the table after a feast I had cooked. "We do more than reject it," she replied. "We let them believe they still have the upper hand. We wait." Waiting was the hardest part. It felt passive, counterintuitive. But I trusted Ms. Reed's wisdom. We were giving them the rope, letting them feel secure in their web of lies. And just as the silence was beginning to feel unbearable, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Leo Jenkins, a quiet, meticulous accountant from the finance department, a man I barely knew beyond polite hellos in the hallway. "Ms. Monroe," the email read, "I hope this message finds you well. I was recently let go from FNM. I believe the circumstances of my departure may be connected to yours. I have information regarding the Q3 financial reporting that I feel you have a right to see. If you're open to it, I would like to meet." We met in a nondescript diner halfway between our homes. Leo was a man who seemed to be folding in on himself, his shoulders hunched, his eyes constantly darting around the room. He clutched a coffee mug as if it were an anchor in a storm. "They fired me last Friday," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 days after I submitted my Q3 audit notes to the CFO. I flagged the Viridian project revenue. They were booking it all as immediate income for the third quarter. "I don't understand the technicalities," I admitted. "It's an accounting trick," he explained, a flash of professional indignation in his eyes. "A large portion of that revenue is for work that will be completed over the next 2 years. It should be recognized as deferred income, spread out over future quarters. By dumping it all into Q3, they artificially inflated the quarterly profit. It makes the numbers look spectacular, just in time for the partners' annual bonus calculations." He slid a small, discreet flash drive across the table. I tried to tell them it was a misrepresentation, a violation of standard accounting principles. The CFO told me to rerun the numbers according to the provided executive guidance. It was a direct order to cook the books. I refused. 2 days later, my position was restructured. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of corruption so blatant it was almost elegant in its simplicity. They fired me to avoid paying me my share of the profits. Then they manipulated the books to make those profits seem even larger for themselves. And they fired Leo for having the integrity to question it. "These are my original audit files," Leo said, tapping the flash drive. "And the email chain with the CFO. I backed them up before they cut my network access. It's proof." I took the drive, the small piece of plastic feeling immensely heavy in my hand. "Leo, thank you," I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that went beyond my own case. "You've taken a great risk." He just shook his head. "I worked there for 12 years. I believed in the numbers. The numbers are supposed to be true." With Leo's evidence, our fortress of truth was now impregnable. We had the forged warnings with their incriminating metadata. We had a second whistleblower, a financial expert who could testify to the deliberate manipulation of the company's profits. Ms. Reed's response was swift and decisive. There would be no more letters, no more protracted negotiations. "We request a meeting," she stated, her voice calm but resolute. "With you, me, Declan Thorne, and Mr. Monroe himself. It is time for a frank conversation." They agreed, their confidence likely bolstered by our period of silence. They thought we were coming to surrender. They had no idea we were coming to set the record straight. The conference room was the same glass box where I had been fired. This time, however, the chill in the air felt different. It was the icy stillness before a storm. I sat beside Ms. Reed. A quiet calm settled deep within me. Across the vast mahogany table sat Declan, looking smug and impatient, the company's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Griffith, and at the head of the table, the man who had inherited the firm's soul and squandered it, Mr. Monroe. He was an imposing figure, with a mane of silver hair and an air of untouchable authority. "Let's make this brief," Mr. Monroe said, his tone suggesting we were an inconvenience. "We have made a generous offer. I suggest you take it." Ms. Reed simply smiled and placed a small flash drive on the table. "Before we discuss any offers, I'd like to present a few items for your consideration." Ms. Griffith reluctantly plugged the drive into her laptop, and the large screen on the wall came to life. The first image was a copy of the first written warning they had sent us. "This document," Ms. Reed began, her voice filling the silent room, "alleges that my client was insubordinate on July 14th. It is presented as evidence for her termination for cause." She clicked a small remote. The screen changed, displaying the document's metadata. "And this shows that the file was created on October 26th, the day after my client was fired. The same is true for the other 3 documents you submitted." Declan's smug expression faltered. A muscle in Mr. Monroe's jaw twitched. "A simple clerical error, I'm sure," Ms. Griffith interjected, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," Ms. Reed conceded gracefully. "But let's move on to our second item." The screen changed again, showing a scanned copy of a sworn affidavit. "This is a statement from Mr. Leo Jenkins, formerly of your finance department. In it, he details a direct order from your CFO to improperly recognize deferred income from the Viridian project in the 3rd quarter for the express purpose of inflating stated profits prior to bonus distribution." Mr. Monroe's face, which had been a mask of bored authority, was now pale. He turned his head slowly to look at Declan, his eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Jenkins' affidavit," Ms. Reed continued, her voice relentless in its calm, "is supported by email correspondence and his original, unaltered audit files. Falsifying performance reviews is a serious matter. Willful financial misrepresentation to shareholders and partners, that is another matter entirely. One that I imagine the SEC would find very interesting." The silence in the room was absolute. Declan looked as if he might be physically ill. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Mr. Monroe stared at the screen for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned his gaze back to Declan. His voice, when he finally spoke, was lethally quiet. "Declan, leave the room." "Richard, I can explain," Declan stammered. "Now," Mr. Monroe said, the single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. Declan scrambled to his feet, knocking a glass of water over as he fled. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. Mr. Monroe then turned his attention to me. For the first time, he looked at me not as a former employee or a problem to be managed, but as an equal. "Ms. Monroe," he said, his voice stripped of all pretense. "What is it that you want?" The war was over. All that was left was to negotiate the terms of peace. And I knew exactly what they were. "I want the terms of my contract to be honored," I said, my voice clear and steady. "The full 5%, based on the corrected and audited quarterly profit numbers." Mr. Monroe nodded slowly. "Done." "I want a signed letter of apology for the falsified documents," I continued. "Not for legal purposes. For my own." Another nod. You'll have it. And one more thing, I said, leaning forward slightly. Leo Jenkins was fired for his integrity. I want him to receive a severance package equivalent to 2 years of his salary, accompanied by a letter of recommendation signed by you, praising his meticulous and ethical work. Ms. Griffith started to protest, but Mr. Monroe silenced her with a raised hand. He looked at me, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his cold eyes. He had built his empire on ruthlessness, but he recognized strength when he saw it. Very well, he said. My legal team will draw up the agreement. We stood, and for the first time since I had been hired, I shook his hand as a peer. His grip was firm, his hand dry. It was the handshake of a man who had just staunched a fatal wound. As Ms. Reed and I walked out of the towering glass and steel building, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the rain-slicked pavement. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep, quiet sense of rightness, of a balance restored. I hadn't just fought for my compensation, I had fought for the truth of my own story. The settlement arrived a week later. The number was, as I had calculated, life-altering. The first call I made was to my mother's care facility, arranging payment for the next 5 years. The second was to Leo Jenkins to tell him the news. The relief in his voice was a reward in itself. The third was to Maya, to thank her for her courage. She was being promoted, she told me, to fill part of the vacuum Declan's sudden resignation had left. That weekend, I didn't buy a new car or a lavish vacation. I bought a small, windswept cottage on the coast, an hour's drive from Port Blossom, with a large, untamed garden overlooking the sea. I spent the day with my hands in the rich, dark soil, planting lavender and sea thrift, their hardy roots taking hold against the salt and the wind. My mother, bundled in a warm blanket, sat in a chair on the porch, watching me. You look like yourself again, she said, her voice soft. I looked up, my face smudged with dirt, my hands aching in the best possible way. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and blue, and the sky was a clean slate. I had been eliminated, erased, and devalued. I had been forced to walk through the ashes of a life I had carefully built, but in fighting to reclaim my own narrative, I had found something I hadn't even realized was lost. Not just my security, but myself. I said, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew it to be the simple, unassailable truth. I was Clara, and my garden was finally my own,